The crystal chandelier overhead seemed to mock Adeline with its brilliance, each facet reflecting the 1,000-watt smile of the woman on her husband's arm. That woman wasn't her. In the center of the most exclusive gala of the year, Bennett, her husband of 10 years, was parading his mistress, a starlet draped in diamonds that Adeline knew she had inadvertently paid for. The whispers were like wasps, stinging the air around her. They thought she was a ghost, a relic of a past he was publicly shedding. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't know that by the end of the night, the spotlight they all coveted would find its rightful owner. The invitation had arrived a month ago, resting on the marble island of their cavernous kitchen, like a royal decree. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock, the embossed gold lettering of the Pinnacle Foundation Gala, shimmering under the recessed lighting. It was the social event of the season, a confluence of old money and new power, where billion-dollar deals were sketched on cocktail napkins and reputations were made or shattered between courses. For Bennett Ashford, CEO of Vanguard Properties Attendants, wasn't just recommended. It was required. It was his stage. Adeline traced the sharp edges of the envelope. For 10 years she had been the silent partner in their ascent. While Bennett was the charismatic face of Vanguard, Adeline was the soul. She was the architect whose quiet genius had redefined city skylines, the one who translated cold concrete and steel into living, breathing art. Her designs were the reason Vanguard wasn't just another development firm. It was a legacy. But Bennett had a knack for absorbing her light and reflecting it as his own. "We are a team," he'd say at press conferences, his arm securely around her waist, but his eyes were always on the cameras. Over time, the "we" had become a thinly veiled I. "You'll need a new dress, of course," Bennett had said, not looking up from his tablet as he breezed through the kitchen. His tone was casual, but it carried the weight of an order. "Something stunning. We're at the head table this year. All eyes will be on us." Adeline had simply nodded. The distance between them had grown from a crack to a chasm over the past year. It started with late nights at the office, then unexplained weekend trips. He'd become a stranger who slept in her bed. His phone always face down on the nightstand, buzzing with texts he dismissed as work. A new scent clung to his suits, a cloying, sweet perfume that was nothing like her own subtle fragrance. A week before the gala, she found the first piece of concrete evidence. A receipt tucked into the pocket of a dry-cleaned jacket. It was from a boutique so exclusive it didn't have a sign, only a discreet, polished brass number on the door. The charge was astronomical for a custom-made gown, by a designer known for his audacious body-hugging creations. It was not her style. Below the dress was another item, a diamond necklace, a piece so extravagant it was clearly meant for a grand debut. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. She knew with chilling certainty that the dress and the necklace were not for her. The name on the customer profile was not Adeline Ashford. It was Katerina Lowe. Adeline's fingers flew across her keyboard, a quick search bringing up the face that would haunt her dreams. Katerina Lowe was an Instagram model turned aspiring actress, known more for her red carpet appearances with wealthy benefactors than any actual film roles. Her online persona was a curated fantasy of private jets, champagne, and couture. In every photo she had a predatory gleam in her eyes, a hunger for the spotlight. The night before the gala, the final brutal confirmation came. Adeline was in her home studio, trying to lose herself in the blueprints for a new pediatric hospital wing she was designing pro bono, when she heard Bennett in the hallway. He was on the phone, his voice a low, intimate murmur. "Everything's set for tomorrow, kitten," he said, and Adeline's blood ran cold. He had never had a pet name for her. "Yes, wear the necklace. I want everyone to see you. It's time they understood who the future of Vanguard Properties really is." A pause. Adeline held her breath, pressing her ear closer to the door. "Adeline, no, she's not coming. Said she had a headache." He lied with practiced ease. "It's better this way. A clean break. Tomorrow night, the world meets you. Our world." The click of the door to their bedroom shutting sealed her fate. The world didn't just spin, it shattered. The blueprints blurred through a sudden storm of tears. He wasn't just having an affair. He was replacing her. He was planning to publicly execute their marriage at the very event that was supposed to celebrate their shared success. The humiliation was a physical thing, a crushing weight on her chest that made it impossible to breathe. She collapsed into her chair, the silent scream trapped in her throat. He was going to erase her, and he was going to do it in front of everyone. For an hour, she let the grief wash over her, a tidal wave of betrayal and sorrow. But then, as the tears subsided, something else began to surface. It was a slow, burning ember deep within her. It was the anger of a creator whose work had been stolen. It was the fury of a woman who had been rendered invisible. He thought she had a headache. He thought she would crumble. He had forgotten who she was. He had forgotten that she was the architect. She didn't just design buildings. She designed foundations. And she knew, with a sudden, terrifying clarity, that she could design his ruin just as easily as she had designed his success. The ember of anger glowed brighter, and a plan began to form, a blueprint for a different kind of structure revenge. The initial shock gave way to a cold, crystalline rage. Adeline sat in the dark of her studio, the glow of the monitor illuminating the stark lines of her face. Bennett's words echoed in her mind. It's time they understood who the future of Vanguard Properties really is. He had made a fatal miscalculation. He saw her as a part of the past, a foundation to be paved over. He had forgotten that a foundation, if compromised, could bring the entire structure crashing down. She pulled up the guest list for the Pinnacle Foundation Gala. It was a who's who of finance, technology, and real estate. Every major investor in Vanguard Properties would be there. The board members would be there. The media would be there, hungry for any hint of scandal. Bennett had chosen his stage perfectly, but he'd mistakenly cast himself as the star, not the sacrifice. Her first call was made at 3 a.m. The number belonged to a man she hadn't spoken to in years, but who had never left her mind, Leonard Whitaker. Whitaker was a titan of the architectural world, a living legend who had retired from the day-to-day grind, but still held immense influence. He had been her professor at university, the one who saw the raw, untamed genius in her work and pushed her relentlessly. He had always been disappointed when she'd submerged her career into Bennett's becoming the anonymous force behind the Ashford brand. He answered on the second ring, his voice raspy with sleep, but instantly alert. "Adeline, is everything all right?" "Leonard?" she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. "I need your help. I'm calling in the favor you said I always had." She explained everything, the affair. Bennett's plan to replace her, the public humiliation he had orchestrated for the gala. She didn't cry or waver. She laid out the facts like she was presenting a structural analysis, cold, precise, and damning. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Whitaker let out a low chuckle devoid of humor. "That arrogant fool," he muttered. "He always did think he built the cathedral just because he laid the final brick. I knew this day would come." "What do you need, my dear?" "I need a partner," Adeline said. "And I need a platform." She spent the next hour laying out her plan. It was audacious, risky, and would require perfect timing. It hinged on a secret she had been holding for 6 months, a project she had been developing in her spare time. A passion project that was poised to revolutionize sustainable urban development. It was a concept so innovative, so potentially lucrative, that she had been waiting for the right moment to present it to the Vanguard board. She had naively thought she and Bennett would present it together. Now, it would be her declaration of independence. The Horizon Project, she called it. A self-sustaining city block, a marvel of green architecture that combined residential, commercial, and agricultural spaces in a symbiotic loop. It was brilliant, and she had the schematics, the financial projections, and the environmental impact reports to prove it. Whitaker was silent as she spoke, and for a moment she feared she had overplayed her hand. But when he finally responded, his voice was electric with excitement. "Adeline, this is more than brilliant. It's visionary. Bennett never would have understood it. His vision is limited to the bottom line of the next quarter. This is a legacy." He continued, "Forget Vanguard. Vanguard is Bennett. You are so much more. We'll establish a new entity. I'll make the calls. I'll bring the capital. We'll announce our partnership. But where? At the gala," Adeline said, a smile finally touching her lips. "Bennett wants a show. We'll give him one." The plan was set in motion with ruthless efficiency. Whitaker, with his unimpeachable reputation, began making discreet calls to a handful of the most powerful investors who would be at the gala. He didn't reveal the details, only that he was backing a new venture with a once-in-a-generation talent, and that a preliminary announcement would be made that night. The bait was laid. Meanwhile, Adeline focused on her own preparations. She wasn't just going to the gala. She was making an entrance. She booked an appointment with the one designer Bennett had always deemed too avant-garde for the Vanguard brand. She didn't want a dress. She wanted armor. She chose a gown of midnight blue silk that shimmered like a galaxy. It was elegant, but severe, with a sharp architectural neckline and a cape that flowed from her shoulders like liquid smoke. It was the dress of a queen, not a victim. The day of the gala arrived. Adeline moved through her house like a phantom. Bennett had left early, humming to himself as he chose a bespoke tuxedo. "Sure you don't want to come?" he'd asked, the feigned concern a final twisting knife. "It's going to be quite a night." "I'm sure," she'd replied, her voice neutral. "Have a good time." He kissed her on the cheek, a cold, perfunctory gesture. The scent of Katerina's perfume was already on his collar. As soon as his car pulled away, Adeline's team arrived. A celebrity hairstylist, a makeup artist who worked with movie stars. They were part of the package Whitaker had arranged. As they worked, transforming her, Adeline looked at the woman in the mirror. The sorrow was still there, deep in her eyes, but it was now overlaid with something harder, something forged in the fire of betrayal. She was no longer just Adeline Ashford, the quiet, supportive wife. She was Adeline Hale, her maiden name, the architect of her own destiny. Tonight, she wouldn't just be taking back her life. She would be unveiling her masterpiece. The hours leading up to the gala were a masterclass in controlled chaos. While Bennett was likely sipping champagne with Katerina, basking in the pre-glow of their social launch, Adeline was orchestrating a corporate coup from her living room. Her phone was a constant buzz of encrypted messages and calls. Leonard Whitaker had moved with the speed and precision of a military general. By midday, he had secured verbal commitments from 3 major investors known for their foresight and their impatience with corporate stagnation. One was a tech billionaire who had made his fortune in renewable energy. Another, a private equity magnate with a portfolio heavily weighted in sustainable infrastructure. The third was a woman who ran the largest architectural endowment in the country. Whitaker had simply whispered 2 words to them, Adeline Hale, and the Horizon Project. It was enough. They were intrigued, their appetites whetted for the secret announcement. Adeline, meanwhile, finalized the legal framework. A team of lawyers Whitaker had on retainer had drafted the incorporation documents for Hale Whitaker Innovations. Her intellectual property, including every last blueprint and projection for the Horizon Project, was transferred into the new entity legally shielded from Bennett and Vanguard Properties. It was a clean surgical cut. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of their estate, her transformation team arrived. The makeup artist, a man named Antoine, regarded her with a critical eye. "Mr. Whitaker said you were to be reborn tonight," he said, his French accent clipping the words. "And a phoenix requires the right kind of fire." He worked with an artist's focus, sculpting her face with light and shadow. He emphasized her high cheekbones and the fierce intelligence in her dark eyes. There were no soft pinks or demure shades. He chose a bold crimson lip and a smoky, dramatic eye. "This is not the face of a wife," he declared, holding up a mirror. "This is the face of a CEO." The woman staring back at her was a stranger, yet more herself than she had been in years. The veil of complacency was gone, replaced by a shield of sheer determination. Then came the dress. When she slipped into the midnight silk, it felt less like fabric and more like a second skin. The architectural cut of the neckline framed her face, powerful and uncompromising. The cape was the masterstroke. At rest, it hung behind her with quiet elegance. But with the slightest movement, it billowed out a wave of dark energy that commanded attention. She added no jewelry, save for a pair of diamond earrings that were a gift from her late father, simple, brilliant, and entirely her own. They were a stark contrast to the gaudy, purchased newness of the necklace Katerina would be wearing. Her car, a sleek black town car, completely different from the garish sports car Bennett favored, arrived at precisely 8:30 p.m. Her driver, a discreet professional, also arranged by Whitaker, simply nodded at her. "To the battle, Miss Hale," he said, with a ghost of a smile. "Indeed," she replied, her voice calm. During the drive, she didn't allow herself to feel nervousness or fear. She reviewed the key points of her presentation on a tablet, the data and figures a comforting balm of logic against the emotional storm that brewed beneath the surface. She was not just confronting her husband. She was launching a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. The personal stakes were immense, but the professional stakes were what grounded her. Bennett had tried to destroy her emotionally. She would respond on the battlefield. She knew best business. She had timed her arrival for 9:15 p.m., well after the cocktail hour had begun. She knew Bennett and Katerina would have arrived early, wanting to maximize their time in the spotlight. They would be comfortable by now, surrounded by sycophants, believing the night was theirs. They would be unprepared. As the car pulled up to the grand entrance of the museum, where the gala was being held, Adeline took one last deep breath. The doors were flanked by photographers, their flashes popping like miniature starbursts. She could hear the murmur of the crowd inside, the clinking of glasses, the swell of the orchestra. It was the lion's den. For a fleeting second, the image of Bennett's smug face and Katerina's triumphant smile flashed in her mind, and a pang of the old hurt echoed in her chest. Then she caught her reflection in the darkened window of the car. She saw the woman with the crimson lips and the fire in her eyes. She saw the architect who had built empires. She was not the woman who cried in her studio less than 24 hours ago. She was a force of nature about to make landfall. The driver opened her door. "Showtime," he said softly. Adeline stepped out of the car. The cape swirled around her ankles as a cool night breeze caught it. The flashbulbs turned on her a sudden, blinding onslaught. And with her head held high, Adeline Hale walked into the storm. The grand hall of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was a breathtaking spectacle of power and wealth. The Pinnacle Foundation Gala had transformed the space into an ethereal forest of white orchids and shimmering fairy lights. A string orchestra played softly from a balcony, their music a delicate counterpoint to the low roar of 100 conversations. Bennett Ashford was in his element. He stood near the centerpiece ice sculpture, a towering, intricate model of the Vanguard Tower, with Katerina Lowe clinging to his arm. He was the sun, and she was the dazzling planet caught in his orbit. Katerina was wearing the dress from the receipt, a creation of crimson silk and sequins that left little to the imagination. Around her neck was the diamond necklace, a vulgar spray of carats that screamed new money. They were a spectacle, and they knew it. Bennett radiated a smug satisfaction, accepting congratulations for a recent acquisition with a magnanimous tilt of his head. Katerina, meanwhile, played her part to perfection, laughing a little too loudly, touching Bennett's arm with a possessive air, and meeting the curious stares of the other guests with a defiant smirk. "Bennett, darling, you've outdone yourself this year," purred a society matron whose husband sat on the Vanguard board. Her eyes flickered to Katerina, a silent question hanging in the air. "I believe in investing in assets with high growth potential," Bennett replied, squeezing Katerina's hand. The double meaning was deliberate, and Katerina preened under the attention. The message was clear. Adeline was the old, stable stock, and Katerina was the exciting high-risk, high-reward venture. The whispers followed them as they moved through the room. "Is that Katerina Lowe? Where is Adeline? How scandalous, and at the Pinnacle Gala of all places." Bennett heard the whispers, and he savored them. It was exactly the shockwave he had wanted to create. He was shedding his old life, and he was doing it on the biggest stage imaginable. He felt invincible, the master of his universe. He spotted several of his key investors across the room and steered Katerina in their direction. He wanted them to see his new partner, this vibrant, youthful symbol of his future. He wanted to solidify his image as a man of action, unafraid to make bold, decisive moves in both his personal and professional life. As he approached a small group, including the tech billionaire Tristan Cole, he noticed a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. It started at the entrance, a ripple of silence that began to spread outward, quelling the chatter. Heads began to turn one by one, like dominoes falling in slow motion. The orchestra seemed to falter for a moment. Bennett frowned, annoyed at the interruption. He followed the gaze of the crowd, and then he saw her. For a moment his brain couldn't process the image. It was Adeline, but it was not. The woman standing in the grand archway was a regal, formidable presence. The midnight blue gown seemed to drink the light, and the cape billowed gently behind her, as if stirred by her own personal storm. Her hair, usually in a soft, elegant chignon, was styled in a sleek, powerful sweep off her face. Her makeup was dramatic, her expression serene but unyielding. She paused at the entrance, her eyes sweeping across the room, not with the panicked search of a scorned wife, but with the cool assessment of a monarch surveying her court. The flashbulbs from the press line outside still popped behind her, backlighting her, creating an almost celestial aura. A wave of stunned silence rolled through the hall. Everyone had been expecting a scene, a tearful confrontation, a quiet, humiliated exit. No one had expected this. This was not a victim. This was a revelation. Bennett's blood ran cold. His smug smile froze and then melted from his face. He felt Katerina's grip tighten on his arm, her manicured nails digging into his sleeve. "What is she doing here?" She hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "You said she wasn't coming." Bennett couldn't answer. He was paralyzed by a mixture of shock and a sudden, unwelcome spike of fear. This was not the timid, agreeable woman he had left at home. This was someone else entirely. The power dynamic he had so carefully constructed had just been obliterated by a single, silent entrance. Adeline began to walk her steps unhurried and deliberate. She didn't look at him. She didn't even glance in his direction. Instead, her gaze connected with Leonard Whittaker, who was standing with the gala's host. Whittaker gave her a nearly imperceptible nod. As she moved, people parted for her, as if by instinct. The whispers started again, but their tone had changed. The pity was gone, replaced by awe and confusion. "My God, is that Adeline Ashford? I've never seen her look like that. What is going on?" Bennett felt the spotlight he so cherished swing away from him, leaving him and Katerina in a sudden cold shadow. All eyes were on his wife. The night that was supposed to be his coronation was rapidly turning into something else. And for the first time that evening, Bennett Ashford felt a profound sense of dread. The architect had arrived, and he had a terrifying feeling she was about to condemn the building. Adeline moved through the opulent hall with a grace that was both unnerving and captivating. She was a panther, gliding through a garden of peacocks. Every eye was on her, but her focus was singular. She ignored the gawking faces and the frantic whispers, her path taking her not toward her husband, but toward the very heart of the power structure in the room. Her first stop was the gala's host, a revered philanthropist named Robert Chen. As she approached, he and Leonard Whittaker turned to greet her. "Adeline, my dear," Chen said, his voice booming with genuine warmth as he took both her hands. "You look absolutely breathtaking, a true vision." "Robert, thank you for having me," Adeline replied, her voice clear and steady, carrying easily in the now hushed room. From across the floor, Bennett watched, his jaw clenched. Chen was an old-money gatekeeper. His public approval meant everything. For him to greet Adeline with such open admiration while Bennett stood with his mistress was a subtle but significant shift in the evening's power dynamics. "I believe you were just telling me about a surprise announcement, Leonard," Chen said, turning to Whittaker, but keeping his eyes on Adeline. "Indeed," Whittaker said, his eyes twinkling. "Patience, Robert. The best things are worth the wait." The trio's easy camaraderie was a public spectacle. It was a clear signal to everyone watching. Adeline was not an outcast. She was an honored guest, flanked by two of the most respected men in the room. Katerina was practically vibrating with rage beside Bennett. "Do something," she seethed, her carefully constructed smile now a tight, angry line. "She's making a fool of us. Go over there and get rid of her." Spurred into action, Bennett strode across the floor, his face a mask of cold fury. He was determined to regain control of the narrative. He cut through the crowd, reaching Adeline's side and placing a proprietary hand on her arm. "Adeline," he said, his voice low and menacing. "What is the meaning of this? I thought you were ill." Adeline didn't flinch. She slowly turned her head to look at him, her gaze so glacial it seemed to physically push him back. She then looked down at his hand on her arm with theatrical disdain. "Remove your hand, Bennett," she said calmly. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the focused silence around them it was as clear as a gunshot. Bennett, shocked by her audacity, snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned. "I decided I was feeling better," she continued, turning back to Chen and Whitaker, as if Bennett were nothing more than a minor interruption. "In fact, I've never felt better." The public dismissal was a slap in the face more potent than any physical blow. Humiliation washed over Bennett in a hot wave. He was left standing there, spurned and ignored, as his wife continued her conversation with the host. Katerina, who had followed a few steps behind, looked on in disbelief, her face pale beneath her heavy makeup. Adeline then began to circulate, but not aimlessly. Her movements were precise. She was greeted warmly by Tristan Cole, the tech billionaire. "Adeline," he said, shaking her hand firmly. "Whitaker told me you were working on something special. I'm all ears." She spoke with the head of the architectural endowment, who looked at her with newfound respect. Each conversation was brief, but the message was potent. She was not here as Bennett Ashford's wife. She was here as a professional, a peer connecting with the most influential people in attendance. The tide had turned completely. The room was now divided into two invisible camps. On one side stood Bennett and Katerina, suddenly looking cheap and desperate, their little drama now seeming tawdry and pathetic. On the other was Adeline, a figure of mystery and power, holding court with the titans of industry. The narrative was no longer about a husband leaving his wife. It was about something far bigger, and no one knew what it was. Bennett, desperate to reclaim the spotlight, tried to laugh it off, making a show of getting champagne for Katerina and whispering in her ear. But the act was transparent. The confidence had evaporated from his posture. He kept shooting panicked glances toward Adeline, his mind racing. What was she doing? What was Whitaker's role in this? The orchestra finished a piece, and in the momentary silence, Robert Chen walked toward the stage at the front of the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice amplified by the microphone, "if I could have your attention, please. We have a special unscheduled announcement tonight. A new venture that I believe will reshape the future of our city." A nervous energy filled the room. Bennett felt a knot of pure dread tighten in his stomach. He looked at Katerina, whose face was a mixture of confusion and fear. This was not their announcement. This was not part of the plan. "Please welcome to the stage," Chen continued, "a man who needs no introduction, my dear friend, Mr. Leonard Whitaker." A smattering of applause broke out as Whitaker ascended the few steps to the podium. He stood for a moment, his gaze sweeping the room, before landing for a brief, pointed second on Bennett. Then he smiled. "Thank you, Robert," Whitaker began. "Tonight we are here to celebrate vision, to celebrate the future. For too long, our industry has been dominated by the old ways of thinking, valuing profit over people, concrete over conscience. But that era is coming to an end." Bennett felt the blood drain from his face. Every word was a veiled shot, a missile aimed directly at him and Vanguard Properties. "I am here tonight," Whitaker's voice boomed to announce that I am coming out of retirement for one final transformative project. I am putting my name, my reputation, and my capital behind a new company and a new leader. A leader whose genius has been the ghost in the machine for far too long. A leader who is about to step into the light and claim her legacy. He paused, letting the suspense hang in the air like a thick fog. It is my profound honor to introduce my partner, the visionary architect and CEO of the newly formed Hale Whitaker Innovations, Ms. Adeline Hale. The name Adeline Hale echoed through the grand hall, amplified by the sound system, and landed with the force of a physical blow. A profound collective silence fell over the room, a vacuum of sound where 100 conversations had just been buzzing. For a disbelieving second, no one moved. Then the name was repeated in a cascade of frantic whispers rippling outwards from the stage. Hale. Not Ashford. Bennett felt as if the world had tilted on its axis, sending him into a nauseating, uncontrollable spin. His mind, usually so quick and decisive, became a thick fog of denial. Hale. He hadn't heard that name in a decade. It was the name of the quiet, brilliant student he had met in a university library. The name on their marriage certificate, a relic of a past he had systematically absorbed into his own brand. It was a name that should have been extinct, but here it was being spoken from the most important stage by one of the most powerful men in their industry. Katerina's perfectly manicured nails dug into his bicep, her confusion quickly curdling into panic. "What is he talking about?" she demanded, her voice, a shrill, sharp thing in the charged atmosphere. "Who is Adeline Hale? Is this some kind of joke?" But Bennett couldn't form a reply. He was trapped in a nightmare, his eyes locked on the stage as Adeline moved from her seat. She rose with a liquid grace that seemed to command the very air around her. She wasn't rushing, nor was she hesitant. Her walk to the stage was a procession, a slow, deliberate claiming of a throne that had always been rightfully hers. The spotlight followed her, catching the celestial shimmer of her midnight blue gown and the regal flow of her cape. She was not the wife he had left at home. She was not even the stunning woman who had made a grand entrance an hour ago. This was someone new, a queen ascending to power, and the entire room seemed to be her royal court, holding its breath in collective awe. She reached the podium and stood beside a beaming Leonard Whitaker. She adjusted the microphone, the small sound echoing in the silent hall, and then she lifted her gaze to the audience. Her eyes, calm and luminous under the bright lights, swept across the hundreds of captivated faces. For a fleeting, heart-stopping moment, her gaze passed over Bennett. It was not a glance filled with hatred or triumph or even anger. It was something far more devastating, a look of complete and utter irrelevance. It was the glance a person might give a piece of furniture, a shadow in a corner, a non-entity. In that single chilling moment, Bennett Ashford felt himself cease to exist in her world. "Thank you, Leonard," she began, and her voice, so often soft and tentative in his presence, was now a new instrument entirely. It was rich, clear, and resonated with an unshakable authority that silenced the last of the whispers. "And thank you all. For 10 years I have been proud to contribute to the architectural landscape of this city. I have always believed that buildings are more than just structures of steel and glass. They are the homes for our lives, the incubators for our dreams, and the most tangible legacy we leave for the generations that follow." Her words were elegant, a subtle but unmistakable critique of the profit-first, soulless skyscrapers that had become the signature of vanguard properties under his leadership. But a legacy built on repetition is stagnation, she continued, her voice gaining strength. A future built on the blueprints of the past is not a future at all. It is a memory. Tonight I am thrilled to announce a new chapter, a new philosophy. Hale Whitaker. Innovations is founded on a single radical idea that progress and humanity, profit and sustainability are not mutually exclusive concepts. We are launching a project that will not just add to our skyline, but will fundamentally redefine it. We call it the Horizon Project. As she spoke the name, the massive screen behind her, which had been displaying the Pinnacle Foundation's logo, flickered to life. A breathtaking 3D rendering filled the space, and a collective gasp swept through the audience. It was a vision of a city block unlike anything they had ever seen. Towers of elegant, sweeping lines were draped in cascading vertical gardens. Transparent sky bridges, latticed with solar panels that resembled stained glass, connected the buildings. Rooftops were not empty voids, but lush parks and thriving agricultural spaces. It was a perfect symbiotic fusion of nature and cutting-edge technology. It was beautiful, visionary, and unmistakably brilliant. It was the design Bennett had glanced at for 30 seconds and called a pipe dream. The Horizon Project, Adeline's voice narrated perfectly timed with the stunning visuals, is a self-sustaining, zero-carbon footprint community. It will generate its own power through integrated photovoltaics and geothermal exchange. It will capture and recycle 100% of its water. It will produce a significant portion of its own food through vertical hydroponic farms. It is not just a development. It is a living, breathing ecosystem. It is our blueprint for the future of urban living. The room was electric. The investors Whitaker had primed were leaning forward, their faces alight with the thrill of discovery. Tristan Cole, the tech billionaire, had a wide, hungry grin on his face. Bennett could feel the tectonic plates of power shifting beneath his feet. He could see his board members staring at the screen, their expressions transforming from shock to awe and then to a cold, hard reassessment of their allegiance to him. Then Adeline prepared to deliver the final fatal blow. Her voice remained calm, but it took on the sharp, precise edge of a surgeon's scalpel. A vision, of course, is only a dream without the resources and the location to make it a reality, she said, letting the statement hang in the air. Bennett felt a tiny, insane flicker of hope. It's just a concept, he thought. A fantasy to embarrass me. Which is why, Adeline continued, I am so deeply grateful to the incredible foresight of our initial investment partners, including Mr. Tristan Cole and the Atherton Endowment, who have joined Mr. Whitaker and myself in our cause. She nodded graciously to her new allies, who nodded back, sealing their public pact. With their support, I am pleased to announce that Hale Whitaker Innovations has already secured full and exclusive funding for the first phase of development. The flicker of hope in Bennett's chest died. Furthermore, she said, her eyes finding his in the crowd for one final pointed moment, we have acquired the exclusive development rights to the North Shore parcel. If the name Hale had been a shockwave, this was a nuclear detonation. The North Shore parcel, the single most valuable and sought-after piece of land in the city. The project that was supposed to be Vanguard's magnum opus, his own legacy. He had poured millions into lobbying, planning, and securing back-channel agreements for that land. The blood drained from his face and the roar in his ears drowned out all other sound. He had been gutted, disemboweled in a room full of his peers, his investors and his enemies. He had been so focused on the personal humiliation, he hadn't seen the professional annihilation coming. She hadn't just planned to leave him. She had planned to bankrupt him, to dismantle his empire brick by brick. And she had just pulled out the cornerstone. "We are breaking ground next month," Adeline concluded, her voice ringing with unwavering conviction. "The future is not something we wait for. It is something we build." For a beat, there was silence. Then the room exploded. It wasn't just applause. It was a standing ovation, a roar of approval and excitement for her vision and her victory. Leonard Whittaker embraced Adeline on stage, a proud mentor, celebrating his greatest student. Bennett stood frozen amidst the chaos invisible. Katerina was staring at him, her face a mask of horrified comprehension. The diamonds around her neck suddenly looked like cheap glass. She had attached herself to a man who had just been rendered obsolete. The spotlight she craved had indeed found its owner, and it was burning Bennett Ashford to ashes. The applause that washed over the grand hall was a physical force, a tidal wave of sound that seemed to slam Bennett Ashford against the marble floors. It was not for him. This roaring, thunderous validation was for Adeline. And for him, it was the sound of his world being torn apart piece by excruciating piece. He stood frozen, a statue, in a bespoke suit, as the warmth and light of the room seemed to recede, leaving him in a pocket of profound cold. Every clap was a hammer blow against the fragile facade of his life. Katerina was the first to react, her survival instincts razor-sharp. Her perfectly manicured fingers, which had been digging into his arm like talons, suddenly released their grip. Her eyes, wide with a predator's assessment of a failed hunt, darted from Adeline on the stage to the powerful figures in the crowd, now looking at her with undisguised contempt. She had backed the wrong horse, and the stench of his failure was beginning to cling to her. "You idiot!" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper, meant only for him. Her practiced smile was gone, replaced by a snarl of pure disgust. "You told me she was nothing. You're a bad bet, Bennett. The worst I ever made." Without another glance, she detached herself from his side. With the fluid grace of a creature escaping a trap, she smoothed down her crimson dress, lifted her chin, and slinked into the throng of guests, disappearing like a wisp of smoke. She was just another casualty of his catastrophic miscalculation, another asset he could no longer afford. He watched her go, a bitter acknowledgement rising in his throat. She wasn't leaving him. She was simply moving toward the new center of gravity in the room, his wife. As Adeline descended the stage, flanked by an exultant Leonard Whittaker, she was immediately enveloped by a coterie of the city's most influential people. It was a magnetic pull, a realignment of the solar system around a new sun. Bennett watched paralyzed, as men he considered his allies, his board members, the very pillars of his professional life, bypassed him without a flicker of recognition. One of them, a man named Jeffrey, who he'd golfed with just last week, had to physically shoulder past him to get to Adeline. Jeffrey caught his eye for a split second, and in that glance, Bennett saw it all: pity, disdain, and the cold, hard dismissal of a man cutting his losses. A primal rage born of sheer terror finally broke through his paralysis. He had to do something. He couldn't let her obliterate him without a fight. He began to push through the crowd, his movements clumsy, earning him annoyed glares. He was a ghost at the feast, an unwelcome reminder of a fallen regime. Finally, he broke through the circle of admirers and stood before her. "Adeline," he said, his voice a low, desperate growl. "A word. Now." The chatter around them died down. Adeline turned slowly, her expression placid, as if addressing a stranger who had lost his way. "I don't think we have anything left to discuss. she said, her voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "You can't do this," he hissed, grabbing her arm, his fingers digging into the fine silk. "Those designs, the Horizon Project. You developed it all while you were with Vanguard. It's company property. It belongs to me." A collective gasp went through their audience. Adeline didn't flinch. Instead, she looked down at his hand on her arm with a look of profound weariness, as if swatting away a persistent fly. "Remove your hand, Bennett," she commanded, her voice soft, but laced with steel. He let go as if her skin had burned him. "You really should have paid more attention to the details," she said, her gaze sweeping over the powerful witnesses around them. "Not just to our marriage, but to the law. Any work I did in my own time, in my own studio using my own resources, is my legally protected intellectual property. I filed the copyrights and patents under my maiden name 6 months ago. The very same day, in fact, that you breezed past my desk, glanced at my life's work, and dismissed it as a utopian fantasy that wasn't worth your time. Thank you for that, by the way. Your official disinterest will make a wonderful exhibit in any potential court case." Each word was a perfectly aimed dart, puncturing his rage and deflating it into pure, pathetic horror. He had been so comprehensively outmaneuvered that it defied comprehension. This wasn't a spontaneous act of revenge. It was a long-planned, meticulously executed checkmate. "This isn't over," he snarled the threat, sounding hollow even to his own ears. Adeline almost smiled, but it was a sad, fleeting expression. "Oh, Bennett," she said, the pity in her voice, a final, devastating blow that stripped him of his last shred of dignity. "It was over before it even began. You just didn't know it." She turned her back on him then, a final, definitive act of dismissal. She seamlessly resumed her conversation with Tristan Cole, leaving Bennett standing alone in the wake of her power, a pariah in the middle of a party that was once his. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The next morning, the headlines screamed his name. Vanguard in freefall. Architect's revenge. Ashford's gala of ruin. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls he didn't dare answer. An emergency board meeting was called via a curt email, his attendance not requested. By noon, a press release announced his termination as CEO, citing a crisis of confidence in his leadership. Weeks bled into a miserable month. His assets were frozen pending legal battles he knew he couldn't win. The cavernous house, once a symbol of his success, became his prison, its silence echoing with the ghost of his failures. He saw Katerina on a tabloid news show, weeping crocodile tears as she recounted how she had been manipulated and deceived by him. She was already rebranding, already finding her next host. Finally broken, and with no other options, he drove to the city's newest and most talked-about office building. The sleek glass and steel structure bore a discreet sign, Hale Whitaker Innovations. It was a building he could never have conceived of. It was too hopeful, too brilliant. He had to beg the receptionist to even announce his presence. After a long, humiliating wait, he was shown not to a grand office, but to a small, sterile conference room with glass walls that looked out onto a vibrant, collaborative workspace. The energy of the place, the quiet hum of creativity and ambition, was a stark contrast to the suffocating fear that had defined his last days at Vanguard. When Adeline entered, the breath caught in his throat. She wasn't wearing a gala gown, but a simple, impeccably tailored pantsuit. She looked energized, focused, and more beautiful than he had ever seen her. Success was her native element. He had only been a tourist. "What do you want, Bennett?" she asked. There was no emotion in her voice, only the flat, efficient tone of someone with a busy schedule. I'm sorry, Addie. he began the old nickname, feeling like a shard of glass in his mouth. I was a fool, a monster. I see that now. I took you for granted. I destroyed everything that mattered. Yes, you did, she agreed, her gaze unwavering. He swallowed his pride, the act itself, a painful lump in his throat. I have nothing left. The lawyers have taken everything. I came to ask, to beg, if there's a place for me here. A consultant, an assistant, anything. I know the business. Adeline leaned forward, her hands clasped on the table. A flicker of something not pity, but a kind of academic curiosity passed through her eyes. You know, for years I believed my greatest and most complex project was the Vanguard Tower. But I was wrong, she said, her voice soft, contemplative. My biggest project was you. I spent 10 years propping you up, polishing your image, feeding you ideas, and pretending they were yours so your fragile ego wouldn't break. I designed your entire public persona, Bennett. I built you from the ground up. And my only regret is that the materials I had to work with were so fundamentally flawed. She stood, then her movement signaling the absolute end of their interaction. She walked to the glass door, pausing with her hand on the handle. The difference between you and one of my buildings, she said, turning to look at him one last time, is that a building with a faulty foundation can sometimes be saved with reinforcement and careful retrofitting. But you're a tear-down. There's nothing left to salvage. She opened the door and walked out into the bright, bustling office, back to the future she was building. She didn't look back. Bennett was left alone. In the glass box, the silence of the room, a roaring testament to his own emptiness. He could see her outside, laughing with her colleagues, a blueprint for a better world spread out before her. He was just a ghost, a ruin. She had left behind a man who had not only lost the spotlight, but had finally understood he'd never truly been in it at all. Adeline Hale's story isn't just about revenge. It's a powerful testament to the fact that our greatest strength is often the very thing others underestimate. She turned the deepest betrayal into her defining moment, not by stooping to her husband's level, but by rising so far above it that he could no longer even cast a shadow on her. Her journey from the quiet architect behind the scenes to the visionary leader in the spotlight reminds us that our worth is never defined by someone else's inability to see it. It is forged in our own talent, resilience, and the courage to finally build our own future. If Adeline's journey from the shadows to the spotlight resonated with you, show your support by hitting that like button. Share this story with anyone who needs a reminder of their own power. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of incredible karma and empowerment. Thank you for watching. What happens when a single cruel comment in a 5-star restaurant echoes into the sterile silence of a billion-dollar boardroom? We've all felt the sting of being misjudged, of being made to feel small by someone who holds all the cards. But this isn't just a story about an insult. It's a story about the moment the tables don't just turn, they flip with the force of a hurricane. It's about the shattering collision of assumption and reality, where the person you dismiss today might just hold your entire future in their hands tomorrow. This is the story of Mirabel Kowalski, a waitress whose accent was mocked, and the day the man whose girlfriend mocked her had to beg for her approval. The ambient hum of Ethelgard was a carefully orchestrated symphony of quiet wealth. It was the sound of heavy silver cutlery kissing porcelain, the gentle slosh of a $2,000 Bordeaux being poured into a crystal glass, and the murmur of conversations that could shift stock prices or dissolve marriages. For the patrons, it was an escape. For Mirabel Kowalski, it was the front line. At 26, Mirabel moved through this world with a grace that belied the ache in her feet and the weight of her reality. She wore the restaurant's uniform, a tailored black dress, simple but elegant, like a suit of armor. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a severe, immaculate bun, and her focus was absolute. She could anticipate a diner's need for more water from across the room, describe the notes of a pouilly fuissé, with unfeigned expertise, and balance 3 sizzling plates on one arm, without a tremor. She was, by all accounts, an exemplary waitress. But there was one thing she couldn't hide. One part of her that didn't fit the polished aesthetic of Ethelgard, her accent. It was thick, unapologetically Polish, a melody of rolling R's and softened vowels that was a legacy of her childhood in Gdansk. She had arrived in New York with her parents at 16, full of dreams that the city had a way of grinding into dust. Her father's construction business had collapsed after a bad partnership, and a subsequent stroke had left him needing constant care. Her mother, a proud woman who once taught literature, now worked cleaning houses to make ends meet. Mirabel, meanwhile, was a ghost in her own life. By day, she was a final-year student at NYU, pursuing a double major in business administration and computer science on a patchwork of scholarships and loans. Her professors saw a quiet, intensely brilliant student who rarely spoke but consistently topped every exam. By night, she worked at Ethelgard, the punishingly long shifts and generous tips, the only thing keeping her family afloat and paying for her father's mounting medical bills. Her real life, the one that burned inside her, happened in the stolen hours between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. Hunched over her laptop in their cramped Queen's apartment, the rhythmic click of her keyboard, a secret language of ambition. Tonight was a Tuesday, typically a slower evening, but Table 7 was an island of noise and entitlement in the calm sea of the dining room. It was the domain of Richard Davenport. Even people who didn't follow the tech world knew the name. Davenport Innovations had revolutionized data security with its Aegis protocol, making Richard a billionaire before his 30th birthday. He was handsome in a way that seemed almost unfair. Sharp jaw, thoughtful brown eyes, and an easy confidence that came from never having heard the word no. He was a regular, and usually a pleasant one. Distracted always on his phone, but polite. The problem wasn't Richard. The problem was his companion, Tiffany Hayes. Tiffany was a creature of Instagram, a meticulously curated collection of angles and filters. Her fame was built on showcasing a life of effortless luxury, a life entirely funded by Richard. Tonight she was holding court with 2 other women who were carbon copies of herself, all sharp, contouring lip filler, and the vacant predatory boredom of those who have everything and value nothing. And then he had the audacity to say the lighting was unflattering for the photo Tiffany was saying, her voice a shrill instrument of complaint. I was like, babe, it's a helicopter. The lighting is what it is. Her friends laughed, a sound like tiny, sharp bells. Richard offered a faint, distracted smile, his thumb scrolling endlessly on his phone. Mirabel approached the table with the water pitcher. More water, sir, ma'am? She asked, her voice low and professional. Tiffany didn't look at her. She just waved a dismissive hand, a Cartier bracelet jangling on her wrist. We're ready to order. Finally. Mirabel stood patiently, pen and notepad in hand. She had learned long ago not to let the casual cruelty of her customers pierce her armor. She was a professional. This was a transaction. The friends ordered quickly salads, appetizers, a flurry of modifications. Then it was Tiffany's turn. She scanned the wine list, her brow furrowed in concentration, as if she were deciphering ancient scripture. "We'll start with a bottle of the Sauve." She stumbled her perfectly manicured finger, tapping the menu. "The Sauvignon Blanc." She pronounced it with a hard, flat G and an anglicized blank. "An excellent choice, ma'am." Mirabelle said, her professionalism unwavering. "The 2022 from Sancerre is particularly crisp this season." She pronounced it correctly softly, without a hint of correction in her tone, Sauvignon Blanc. It was a tiny thing, a breath of air. But to Tiffany, it was a challenge. Her head snapped up, her blue eyes narrowing. It was the first time she had made direct eye contact with Mirabelle all evening. A slow, mocking smile spread across her glossed lips. "Oh, listen to that," Tiffany said, looking at her friends, her voice dripping with condescension. "Where did they find you, sweetheart?" "Fresh off the boat from—" "Where is it?" "Boratistan." Her friends giggled. Richard finally looked up from his phone, a flicker of discomfort in his eyes. He saw Mirabelle standing ramrod straight, her face a pale, impassive mask. He saw Tiffany preening from her cheap shot. He should have said something. A simple "Tiffany, don't be rude" would have sufficed. But he hated confrontation, especially public confrontation. He just offered a weak, apologetic grimace in Mirabelle's direction and looked back down at his screen, effectively siding with his girlfriend through his silence. The silence was his sin, and it was a sin Mirabelle would not forget. Tiffany, emboldened, leaned forward. "Say it again for me." She cooed, her voice a weapon. "Say Sauvignon Blanc." She mimicked a thick, cartoonish Eastern European accent, turning the elegant French words into a clumsy, ugly sound. Sauvignon Blanc. The two friends howled with laughter, this time loud enough to turn heads at the neighboring tables. The meticulously crafted hum of Ethelgard had been broken. For a moment, Mirabelle felt the heat rise in her cheeks, the familiar, sickening shame of being singled out for being different. She could feel the stares of the other diners. She wanted the floor to swallow her whole. But then something else took over. A cold, hard resolve that had been forged in the fires of her family's struggles. She thought of her father's frail hands, her mother's chapped knuckles, her own sleepless nights filled with code. These people with their casual cruelty and unearned fortunes knew nothing of strength. She met Tiffany's mocking gaze directly. Her own eyes, a deep, intelligent grey, were steady. She did not raise her voice. She did not tremble. "It is pronounced Sauvignon Blanc," she said, her Polish accent suddenly sounding not like a flaw, but like a statement. It was clear, precise, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Is there anything else I can get for you?" The confidence, the sheer refusal to be cowed, stunned Tiffany into silence. The laughter from her friends died in their throats. They had expected tears or a flustered retreat. They didn't know what to do with this quiet, unshakable dignity. Tiffany scoffed, trying to regain control. "Whatever. Just bring the wine." Mirabelle gave a single, sharp nod. "Of course." She turned and walked away, her back perfectly straight. She didn't rush. She didn't falter. She moved with the same measured grace as before, but now it felt different. It was the grace of a queen retreating from a peasant's squabble. As she entered the controlled chaos of the kitchen, she allowed herself one deep, shuddering breath. The chef, A burly man named Antoine, who missed nothing, gave her a sympathetic look. "Let me guess. Table 7. Mirabelle just nodded, retrieving a wine bucket. "Don't let them get to you, ma chérie," he said gruffly. "Their money can't buy class." Mirabelle managed a small, tight smile. "I know." But as she chilled the bottle and polished the glasses, the scene replayed in her mind. It wasn't just Tiffany's overt cruelty that stung. It was Richard Davenport's silence, his tacit approval. He, a titan of industry, a man lauded for his brilliant mind, had sat there and let it happen. He had looked at her, seen her humiliation, and chosen to do nothing. She finished her shift in a haze of cold fury. The hours crawled by. When she finally clocked out at 1:30 a.m., she didn't take the subway. She walked the 50 blocks back to Queens, the cold night air doing little to cool the fire in her chest. Each step was a promise to herself. One day, they would not see a waitress. They would not hear an accent. They would only see her power. She let herself into the quiet apartment. Her mother was asleep in a chair by her father's bed. Mirabelle gently placed a blanket over her. She looked at her father, his face peaceful in sleep, and felt a surge of fierce protective love. This was why she endured it. For them. But it was also for herself. She sat down at her desk, the city lights twinkling outside her window. She opened her laptop. The screen illuminated her face, her expression now hard and determined. On the screen was a complex web of code, a revolutionary logistics algorithm she had named Nightingale. It was designed to optimize supply chains by prioritizing ethical sourcing and environmental sustainability without sacrificing efficiency. It was brilliant, it was groundbreaking, and it was almost finished. For months, she had been sending out her business proposal to venture capital firms, getting nothing but automated rejections. They saw a student from Queens with no track record and didn't bother to read past the first page. But 2 weeks ago, one had responded. A boutique firm called Horizon Ventures, run by a legendary, notoriously tough investor named Catherine Albright. They had asked for more data. Then a technical demonstration. Then a meeting. The meeting was tomorrow. Wednesday. At 10 a.m. She checked the location on the calendar invitation one last time, a bitter smile touching her lips. Location Davenport Innovations. 45th floor boardroom. She closed her eyes. She could still hear Tiffany's mocking voice. Sauvignon Blanc. She could still see Richard Davenport's averted gaze. Tomorrow he would look at her. Tomorrow he would have no choice. Richard Davenport lived in a penthouse that felt less like a home and more like a modern art museum. It was a cavern of glass chrome and white marble overlooking Central Park, a sterile testament to his success. And tonight, it felt like a prison. After leaving Ethelgard, the mood in the car had been tense. Tiffany, sensing his disapproval, had launched into a defensive tirade. "Oh, don't give me that look, Richie," she'd said, reapplying her lipstick in the vanity mirror. "It was a joke. She needs to lighten up. It's not my fault she can't speak English properly. Her English is perfect, Tiff." "She has an accent." Richard had replied, his voice flat. He kept his eyes on the blur of city lights, the image of the waitress's dignified, hurt face seared into his mind. Accent can't speak English, same thing. She's a waitress. Her job is to be agreeable. If she's so sensitive, maybe she should get a different job. He didn't argue further. He knew it was pointless. Arguing with Tiffany was like punching water. It was exhausting, and you never made an impact. He'd met her at a charity gala 6 months ago. She was beautiful, vivacious, and utterly uncomplicated. She was a distraction, an easy and attractive accessory to his demanding life. He hadn't been looking for a partner. He'd been looking for a reprieve. Now he was beginning to realize that her lack of complication was a symptom of a profound lack of depth, a hollowness that her beauty could no longer conceal. His silence at the restaurant gnawed at him. He told himself he'd avoided a scene, that it was the pragmatic choice. But he knew better. It was cowardice. He who could face down hostile boards and ruthless competitors had flinched from correcting his girlfriend's playground cruelty. He had failed a basic test of character, and the knowledge left a sour taste in his mouth. He went to bed long after Tiffany had fallen asleep, but sleep wouldn't come. He kept thinking about the look in the waitress's eyes. It wasn't just hurt. It was recognition, as if she had seen him exactly for what he was, in that moment weak. He finally drifted off into a restless sleep, his last thought being a vague hope that he would never see her again, if only to escape the reminder of his own failure. Meanwhile, in a small apartment in Queens, Mirabel Kowalski was preparing for war. She slept for exactly 2 hours, a disciplined, necessary shutdown of her mind and body. She woke at 4 a.m., the city still cloaked in darkness. The first thing she did was check on her parents. Her mother was now asleep in her own bed. Mirabel adjusted her father's pillows and checked his vitals monitor, the soft, steady beep, a familiar comfort. She whispered, "Dzień dobry, tato." Good morning, Dad, a ritual she never missed. Then she began her transformation. She showered, letting the hot water wash away the grime of the restaurant and the lingering humiliation of the night. She chose her outfit with the precision of a general selecting his uniform. It wasn't expensive, a simple charcoal grey pantsuit she'd bought at a consignment shop and had tailored to fit her perfectly. Underneath a crisp white silk blouse, her mother had given her one of the few nice things they'd managed to keep from their old life. She pulled her dark hair not into a waitress's bun, but into a low, elegant chignon. Her makeup was minimal, designed to enhance, not conceal. A touch of concealer for the dark circles under her eyes, a sweep of mascara to define her sharp gaze, and a neutral shade on her lips. When she looked in the mirror, the person staring back was not Mirabel the waitress. It was Maya Kowalska, founder and CEO of Nightingale. The accent was still part of her, but today it would be a mark of her unique perspective, not a target for mockery. She spent the next few hours running through her presentation one last time, her laptop open on the small kitchen table. The algorithm was her masterpiece. Nightingale didn't just find the cheapest or fastest route for a supply chain. It cross-referenced data from dozens of sources, NGO reports on labor practices, satellite imagery, tracking deforestation, real-time carbon emissions data, and used machine learning to create logistical pathways that were not only efficient, but certifiably ethical and sustainable. For a major corporation, it was a PR dream, a shield against scandal, and as her financial models showed a source of long-term profitability in a world increasingly conscious of corporate responsibility. At 8:30 a.m., she kissed her sleeping mother's forehead and slipped out of the apartment. She took the subway, her briefcase clutched in her hand. She stood amongst the throng of mourning commuters, invisible, just another face in the crowd. But inside, she was a supernova ready to explode. Catherine Albright was already in the Davenport Innovations lobby when Mirabel arrived at 9:45 a.m. Catherine was in her late 50s with a severe silver bob and eyes that could dissect a balance sheet from 50 paces. She was wearing a blood-red Armani suit, a splash of predatory color in the building's monochromatic lobby. She was a legend in the VC world, known for her brutal honesty and her uncanny ability to spot talent where no one else was looking. "Maya," she said, her voice crisp. She never used the anglicized Mirabelle. "You're punctual. I like that. It suggests you respect other people's time." "Good morning, Miss Albright," Mirabelle said, her voice steady. "Nervous." Focused, Mirabelle corrected gently. Catherine's thin lips curved into a rare smile. "Good. Remember what I told you. You don't need them. They need you." Davenport's company has taken a beating in the press over the last year for their suppliers in Southeast Asia. Child labor allegations. Environmental corners cut. Their stock is solid, but their brand is vulnerable. Nightingale isn't just a piece of software for them. It's absolution. You are not asking for a handout. You are selling the cure. Mirabelle nodded, the words reinforcing her own resolve. "They don't know who you are," Catherine continued as they walked toward the exclusive elevators for the upper floors. "My office just referred to you as the project lead. They think they're meeting some seasoned veteran I poached from a rival. Let them think that. Walk in there, own the room, and don't give them an inch. Understood?" "Understood, Ms. Albright." The elevator ride to the 45th floor was silent. Mirabelle could feel the pressure change in her ears. She was ascending quite literally into a different world. The doors opened onto a reception area that was more gallery than office. A massive abstract sculpture dominated the center, and the walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a godlike view of Manhattan. A sleek receptionist led them to the boardroom. "Mr. Davenport will be with you in a moment. He's just finishing a call." The boardroom was an intimidating space. A vast, dark wood table sat polished to a mirror shine, surrounded by 20 leather chairs. One entire wall was a screen. The view from the windows was breathtaking, designed to remind any visitor of the sheer scale of the power wielded within these walls. Catherine and Mirabelle took their seats, setting up their laptops. They were a team of two, facing what would likely be a full retinue of Davenport's top brass. A few minutes later, 3 men in expensive suits entered. They introduced themselves as the COO, CFO, and Chief Legal Officer. They were polite but dismissive, their eyes constantly flicking towards the door waiting for their boss. Then the door opened, and Richard Davenport walked in. He looked tired. He was loosening his tie, speaking to his assistant as he entered. "Just push the Tokyo call to 5, and get me coffee, a large black coffee." He turned to the table, a professional, welcoming smile already forming on his face. "Catherine, it's great to see you. I've heard incredible things from my team about this Project Nightingale. We're very excited to finally meet the genius behind it." His eyes scanned the table. He nodded at Catherine, and then his gaze moved to the poised, professional woman sitting beside her. And his world stopped. Time seemed to slow down. His professional smile froze, then melted away, replaced by a look of utter slack-jawed disbelief. The blood drained from his face. It was her. The waitress. The woman with the Polish accent. The woman his girlfriend had humiliated last night. The woman whose humiliation he had silently condoned. She was here, in his boardroom, wearing a suit that looked more commanding on her than his own did on him. Her hair was different. Her expression was different, but there was no mistake. It was her. The same steady, intelligent grey eyes that had met Tiffany's mockery with unshakable dignity were now looking at him across his own boardroom table. Mirabelle held his gaze. She did not smile. She did not smirk. Her expression was perfectly, terrifyingly neutral. She offered no flicker of recognition, no sign that she had ever seen him before in her life. It was a power move of such exquisite subtlety that it knocked the air from his lungs. Catherine Albright, oblivious to the personal drama unfolding, seized the moment. "Richard, gentlemen," she said, her voice cutting through the thick tension only Richard could feel. "Allow me to introduce the founder and architect of the Nightingale platform, Miss Maya Kowalski." Richard's COO, a man named Bob, stood up to shake her hand. "Ms. Kowalski, a pleasure." Mirabelle stood and shook his hand firmly. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Peterson." Richard remained frozen in place, his mind a frantic, screaming mess. Waitress, accent, Tiffany. Oh God, he felt a wave of nausea. This couldn't be happening. It was some bizarre, stress-induced hallucination. But it was very, very real. Catherine was looking at him, an eyebrow slightly raised at his stunned silence. He had to say something. He had to function. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "Ms. Kowalski," he managed to say, his voice strained. "Welcome to Davenport Innovations." Mirabelle finally turned her full attention to him. She gave him a small, polite, and utterly impersonal nod. "Mr. Davenport," she said, her voice calm and clear. Her Polish accent was still there, the same accent from last night. But in this context, in this room, coming from this woman in a power suit who was being presented as a genius, it sounded different. It sounded authoritative, exotic, powerful. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with us," she said. He felt like he had been punched in the gut. She was acting as if they were complete strangers. The cold professional courtesy was 1,000 times more damning than any accusation would have been. She was showing him in no uncertain terms just how insignificant their previous encounter was to her. She had already moved on. She was here to do business, and he was just another client. He sank into his chair at the head of the table, his mind reeling. His carefully ordered world had just been turned upside down, and the person who had done it was now coolly opening her laptop, ready to decide his company's future. The presentation began, but for Richard, the first 10 minutes were a silent movie played against the screaming soundtrack of his own shame. His mind was a feedback loop of panic. The waitress, the accent, Tiffany's mocking voice. My silence. He stared at Mirabelle, but he wasn't seeing a poised executive. He was seeing the ghost of his own cowardice from the night before. His team, however, was captivated. They knew nothing of the drama. They simply saw Maya Kowalski take command of the room. She spoke with an unhurried, deliberate confidence. She didn't try to mask her Polish accent. She owned it. In the sterile, powerful context of the boardroom, it sounded not like a flaw, but like a mark of distinction. She began not with financials, but with a foundational truth. Every product on every shelf has a hidden history. She said, her voice resonating with a quiet passion as an image of a deforested landscape filled the screen behind her. A history of materials, sourced hands that touched it, and fuel that was burned to bring it to us. For decades, that history has been a black box deliberately obscured for the sake of profit. We are told that ethics are expensive and sustainability is inefficient. This is the foundational lie of modern logistics. She clicked to the next slide, a complex, elegant web of data points blooming on the screen. Nightingale changes that paradigm. My algorithm doesn't just track products, it tracks provenance. It doesn't just optimize for speed, it optimizes for integrity. Using a proprietary blend of blockchain verification, real-time satellite monitoring, and cross-referenced NGO data, Nightingale provides a single immutable score for any given supply route. We call it the Integrity Index. Richard's COO, Bob Peterson, leaned forward, his initial air of dismissal evaporating. Are you saying you can actually quantify corporate responsibility in real time? I'm saying I can give you a dashboard that will tell you with 99.8% accuracy if a subcontractor 3 levels down your supply chain is using child labor before it becomes a headline in the New York Times. Mirabelle stated, her gaze sweeping across the executives. The platform will then automatically suggest alternative pathways that maintain your integrity index above a preset threshold, while minimizing the impact on delivery time and cost. The CFO, a hawk-eyed man named Gerald, jumped in his tone, skeptical. That sounds impossibly ambitious. And expensive. What's the cost of integration? Mirabelle turned to him, a flicker of a smile on her lips. This was a question she was born to answer. The cost of integration is approximately 1/5 the average cost of a brand reputation crisis. However, our models project a 15% increase in long-term profitability for early adopters through 3 main avenues. She held up her fingers. 1. Premiumization. The ability to market your products as Nightingale certified allows for a higher price point. 2. Risk mitigation. You will virtually eliminate the risk of costly scandals and boycotts. And 3. Investor confidence. In a market pivoting hard towards ESG metrics, having the highest integrity index in your industry makes you a magnet for capital. It was at that moment Richard finally snapped out of his personal hell. He was a businessman above all else, and what he was hearing was not just brilliant, it was revolutionary. He had spent the last year in damage control over a supplier scandal. This woman, Ms. Kowalski, wasn't just offering a solution, she was offering a fortress. He looked at the flawless logic of her financial models, the sheer genius of her technical architecture. The woman he had dismissed as a simple waitress was a visionary. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. His judgment had been so catastrophically, insultingly wrong. He had looked at her and seen a uniform and an accent. He had been as blind and as shallow as Tiffany. The final part of the presentation was a live demonstration. Mirabelle pulled up a hypothetical company and with a few clicks ran the Nightingale analysis. Red flags popped up across the map. Labor abuses, environmental violations. Then she clicked one more button. The algorithm whirred, and in a stunning visual display, the logistical map reconfigured itself. Red lines turned green as new ethical suppliers and cleaner shipping routes were phased in. A new streamlined and profoundly ethical supply chain emerged. A stunned silence fell over the boardroom. Bob Peterson let out a low whistle. "My God," he whispered. "This is the Holy Grail." Catherine Albright, who had been watching with immense satisfaction, sat back in her chair. "Richard, gentlemen," she said, smoothly, seizing the moment. "We are presenting you with an opportunity. Maya is the sole owner of the Nightingale IP. Horizon Ventures is providing the seed capital. We are offering Davenport Innovations the chance to be our foundational client and a minority stakeholder. We believe a 10% equity stake in Nightingale in exchange for a $30 million capital injection would be a suitable arrangement. The room buzzed. 30 million was significant, but for 10% of something this groundbreaking, it was a steal. Richard knew it. Catherine had deliberately underpriced it to spark a fire. "We would obviously need to perform our due diligence," Richard said, the words automatic, the standard corporate. "Dance." "Of course," Mirabelle said coolly, a masterful touch of nonchalance in her voice. "All our data is available for your team to review. We are, however, speaking with 2 other firms in the tech logistics space next week. One of them is in Seattle." The unspoken name hung in the air. Amazon. It was a perfect bluff, whether it was true or not. She was creating urgency. She was in complete control. The meeting concluded with promises of swift follow-ups. Richard's team was electrified, already talking about synergy and market disruption. He insisted on walking Catherine and Mirabelle to the elevators personally. The chatter of his executives faded down the hall, leaving the 3 of them in the grand, silent reception area. "Catherine Ms. Kowalski." "Thank you for coming in," Richard said formally. "The pleasure was ours." "Richard," Catherine replied, giving him a sharp look. "We'll await your term sheet." She stepped into the arriving elevator. "Maya, I'll meet you downstairs." The doors began to close, leaving Richard and Mirabelle alone for a few excruciating seconds. The professional facade between them felt paper-thin. This was his chance. He had to say something. "Listen, Ms. Kowalski." "Mirabelle." He started, his voice low and desperate. "About last night, at the restaurant. Mirabelle looked at him, her face a mask of impenetrable calm. Another elevator pinged open for her. She turned to face him fully, her quiet voice cutting through his fumbling words. "Miss Davenport," she said, the tone formal, but the message deeply personal. "Last night I was your waitress. Today I am a potential business partner. I expect to be treated with the appropriate professional courtesy in both situations. You failed in the first. I trust you will not fail in the second." She didn't wait for a reply. She stepped into her elevator, her back straight, her head held high. Just before the doors slid shut, she delivered her final devastating assessment, her voice soft, but the words landing like daggers. "What your girlfriend said. What you allowed her to say. It was ugly, and it was ignorant. But it has no bearing on this deal. My work speaks for itself." She paused, her cool grey eyes locking onto his. "The question you need to ask yourself, Mr. Davenport, is whether your character does." The doors closed, leaving him standing alone in the echoing silence of his marble palace, the reflection of his own shocked face staring back at him from the polished steel. He had never felt so small in his entire life. The moment the elevator doors closed, Mirabelle leaned against the cool metal wall and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 24 hours. The adrenaline that had fueled her began to recede, leaving a profound, bone-deep weariness in its wake. She had done it. She had faced the dragon in his own lair and walked away unscorched. Catherine Albright was waiting for her in the lobby, a rare, genuine smile gracing her features. She held out a hand. "You, Maya Kowalski, were magnificent." Mirabelle shook it, a real smile finally breaking through her own composure. He was shocked. "Shocked is an understatement," Catherine said, her sharp eyes glinting with amusement. "I haven't seen a man that powerful look, that utterly neutered, since I foreclosed on a Swiss bank. There's a story there, isn't there?" Mirabelle considered for a moment, the memory of Tiffany's sneer flashing in her mind. Let's just say, Mr. Davenport was given a practical lesson in not judging a book by its cover. Catherine nodded, sensing there was more, but having the grace not to press. Well, the hook is set. Deep. They'll send a term sheet by the end of the day. They can't afford not to. Now comes the hard part, negotiation. Go home. Get some sleep. My team will handle the initial volley. We celebrate tonight? Mirabelle felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. Thank you, Catherine, for believing in me. Don't thank me, Catherine replied, her expression turning serious. I believe in profit. Your genius is going to make us both very, very rich. Now go. You've earned a moment of peace. The subway ride back to Queens was surreal. The world outside the train window was unchanged, but Mirabelle's world had been irrevocably altered. She wasn't just a waitress and a student anymore. She was a founder, an innovator, a woman who had made a billionaire squirm. Her final words to him had been unplanned, a raw and honest response to his fumbling apology. She had spoken her truth, and it had felt more powerful than any business pitch. Up on the 45th floor, Richard Davenport was not at peace. He had walked back into the boardroom in a daze, where his team was buzzing with the predatory excitement of sharks that smell blood. The valuation Albright proposed is frankly an insult, Gerald the CFO was saying gleefully. To them, I mean. We should move to acquire the entire company, offer $50 million for 80%. Lock it down before anyone else gets a sniff. Richard stared at them, their words barely registering. He was 1,000,000 miles away, his mind caught on a single damning sentence. The question you need to ask yourself, Mr. Davenport, is whether your character does. Shut up, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. The excited chatter died instantly. 3 pairs of eyes turned to him, baffled. Sir, his COO asked. Everyone just be quiet for a minute, Richard said, rubbing his temples. He walked to the vast window and stared out at the city. But he wasn't seeing the view. He was seeing a highlight reel of his own moral compromises. His relationship with Tiffany was the most glaring. He had tolerated her shallowness, excused her casual cruelty, enabled her entitlement, all because it was easy. And last night, that ease had come at the expense of another person's dignity. A person who, it turned out, possessed more intelligence, resilience, and character than Tiffany had in her entire curated existence. Mirabelle's final words hadn't just been an indictment. They had been a mirror. And he was disgusted by the reflection. He turned back to the room, a new, unfamiliar resolve etched on his face. Gerald, he commanded, draw up a new term sheet. $40 million for a 20% stake. Gerald's jaw dropped. 40 for 20. Sir, that's double the valuation she offered. We have all the leverage here. We have no leverage when we're dealing with someone we should be profoundly grateful to. Richard snapped back. And add a $5 million grant, no strings attached, for the Nightingale Foundation. The what? Bob, the COO, asked. She didn't mention a foundation. She will, Richard said with absolute certainty. A woman like that doesn't build something this revolutionary just for the money. The grant is non-negotiable. It's a sign of good faith. I want to partner with her, not fleece her. Bob, get our best tech team on her code. I want them to be thorough, but I also want them to be deferential. Treat her intellectual property like the crown jewels. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," they chorused, stunned by the seismic shift in their boss's demeanor. "Now get out," he said, his tone softening. "I have a personal matter to attend to." Alone in the sterile quiet of his office, Richard sat behind his massive desk, a symbol of a power that now felt hollow. He knew what he had to do. It was a long overdue amputation. He picked up his phone and called Tiffany. She answered with a bubbly, self-absorbed lilt. "Richie, I was just about to text you. I saw the most divine little Birkin and Tiffany." "We need to talk," he cut in his voice, flat and cold. Her tone shifted instantly. "What's wrong?" "You sound weird." "I'm ending it," he said, tearing the bandage off in one clean motion. "I'm ending things between us." There was a beat of stunned silence, then a sharp, incredulous laugh. "What is this about last night?" "Don't be so dramatic. It was just some stupid waitress." "No," Richard said, his voice hardening. "She wasn't just some stupid waitress. Her name is Maya Kowalski, and she is the founder of a tech company that I am about to invest $40 million into. She was in my boardroom this morning." The silence on the other end was absolute heavy, with the sound of a world view collapsing. That's impossible," she finally stammered. "She's a liar, a con artist. She's trying to trick you, Richie. The only person who has been dishonest is me." "Richard," confessed the words tasting like ash. "By pretending that this relationship was something it wasn't. By pretending I didn't see your cruelty. Last night wasn't an isolated incident, Tiff. It was just the first time I was forced to really look at it. And it made me look at myself. I don't like the person I am with you." "The person you are with me," she shrieked, her voice pitching high with panic and fury. "I made you relevant. Before me, you were just some boring tech nerd. I got you on magazine covers. You got me into parties," he corrected calmly. "She is getting my company into the future. There's a difference. So that's it. You're dumping me for some immigrant waitress with a funny accent." The words were meant as a final venomous insult, but they landed with pathetic desperation. "I'm dumping you because you mocked that woman's accent," Richard said, his voice laced with ice. "And because I sat there and let you. It's over, Tiffany. My assistant will arrange to have your things sent over. Have a good life." He hung up before she could unleash the scream he knew was coming. He then pulled out a sheet of his personal stationery. An email wouldn't suffice. This required more. He began to write not as a CEO to a potential partner, but as a man offering an unvarnished apology to a woman he had wronged. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just hoped to prove that her words had in fact meant something. Humiliated and enraged, Tiffany Hayes did what she did best. She weaponized her platform. That evening, she went live on Instagram to her 2.3 million followers. With expertly produced tears streaming down her face, she spun a lurid tale of betrayal. She painted herself as the devoted girlfriend, blindsided by a ruthless social climbing predator. This woman, she pretended to be a poor, innocent waitress. Tiffany sobbed into her phone's camera. She stalked Richie, found out about his business, and cooked up this elaborate scheme to trick him. "She's using her sob story to steal my life." She never used Mirabelle's name, but her description was viciously precise. This Polish girl with the thick accent. The internet exploded. The comments section became a cesspool of speculation and vitriol. Within an hour, #WaitressGate was trending. At that exact moment, Mirabelle was having a quiet, celebratory dinner with her mother and Catherine at a small, unassuming Polish restaurant in Greenpoint, a place that smelled of home. She felt a profound sense of peace. For the first time, the future felt bright. Then her phone began to buzz, and then Catherine's, and then her mother's with a text from a worried cousin. "Don't look at it," Catherine commanded, her face instantly grim as she scanned a headline on her own screen. "It's a classic smear campaign. She's trying to discredit you before the deal is even announced." But it was too late. Mirabelle had already seen it. Billionaire Davenport dumps. Influencer for mystery waitress. Is Davenport Innovations being conned by an immigrant scammer? The joy from her triumph vanished, replaced by a cold dread. Her story was being twisted into something ugly and unrecognizable. "What do we do?" Mirabelle asked, her voice trembling for the first time that day. Catherine's eyes were cold as steel. "We do nothing. We remain silent and professional." She took a sip of her wine, her gaze distant. "Tiffany has just handed Mr. Davenport a shovel. Let's see if he uses it to dig his own grave or to build a bridge." The digital firestorm Tiffany ignited was more intense than she could have imagined. By morning, Hanster, Waitressgate was the #1 trending topic. Tiffany's tear-streaked, victimized narrative had gone viral, painting Mirabelle as a predatory immigrant social climber. The story was seductive, and the internet devoured it. News outlets, smelling blood, began plastering Mirabelle's student photo next to paparazzi, shots of Tiffany turning her life into a cheap, ugly soap opera. For Mirabelle, the joy of her victory curdled into a familiar, sickening dread. Her phone buzzed with hateful messages. She had fought her way out of the box society had put her in, only to have a new one plastered with lies built around her. In the 45th floor war room of Davenport Innovations, Richard's PR team was in full panic mode. The company's stock was taking a hit, and the board was demanding action. "You have to cut her loose," urged Lena, his head of crisis management. "Issue a statement. Frame it as being misled. Distance yourself from her completely. It's the only way to save your reputation." The room looked at Richard, expecting him to take the pragmatic route. But Richard was thinking of Mirabelle's unshakable dignity, of the casual cruelty she had endured, and of his own shameful silence. He had failed her in private. He would not fail her in public. "No," he said, his voice quiet, but laced with cold iron. "I'm not cutting her loose. I'm doing the opposite." He stood, his decision made. "Lena, clear the main atrium. I want a press conference at 2 p.m. Invite everyone. The Wall Street Journal. The gossip blogs, all of them. I want everyone who is writing this story to be in that room." He spent the next few hours not with spin doctors but with his lawyers. He wasn't crafting an excuse. He was accelerating a deal. The due diligence on Nightingale was complete, and it was, in the words of his head engineer, flawless. He instructed his team to finalize the contracts on the terms he'd offered. He was going to turn a PR crisis into a landmark business announcement. He made one final call to Catherine Albright, outlining his plan and making a single, non-negotiable request. At 2 p.m., the atrium was a media circus, a frenzy of camera flashes and shouting reporters anticipating a juicy scandal. Richard Davenport walked onto the stage alone, a figure of calm resolve amidst the chaos. The room fell silent as he stepped to the podium. "Good afternoon," he began. "I'm here to set the record straight. The narrative being promoted by my former girlfriend, Ms. Tiffany Hayes, is a malicious fiction. Our relationship is over, and her portrayal of events is false." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was not the denial they expected. The truth, he continued, his voice ringing with conviction, is that Ms. Maya Kowalski is a visionary. She is the creator of a platform so revolutionary it will fundamentally change global commerce. She built this while working full-time to support her family and pursuing a double major at university. She did not need to chase my investment. Her genius brought her here on its own merit. He leaned into the microphone, ready to drop his bombshell. Therefore, I am thrilled to officially announce that Davenport Innovations has acquired a 20% stake in her company Nightingale for the sum of $40 million. The room erupted. The sound of 100 camera shutters clicking at once was like a burst of machine gun fire. This wasn't a scandal. It was an acquisition. A massive one. Richard held up a hand, silencing the chaos. Furthermore, we will be endowing the new Nightingale Foundation, chaired by Ms. Kowalski, with a $5 million grant to promote ethical practices in technology. We are not being conned. We are honored to be her partners. He then let his corporate mask fall, his expression turning somber. Finally, regarding the incident at the restaurant, what happened is that my former girlfriend mocked Ms. Kowalski's accent in an act of ugly, classless bigotry. My greatest regret and my personal shame is that in that moment I was silent. For that, I have apologized to Ms. Kowalski privately, and I apologize to her now publicly. Her dignity was absolute. My failure to defend it was a disgrace. The raw honesty of his confession stunned the press into silence. He had taken all the lies and innuendo and incinerated them with the undeniable truth. Maya Kowalski represents the very best of what this country is supposed to be, he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. That it doesn't matter where you come from or what accent you have. All that matters is the strength of your character and the power of your ideas. He gestured to the side of the stage. And now I'd like to introduce you to her. Out walked Catherine Albright, a triumphant glint in her eye. And beside her, walking into the blinding storm of flashes, was Mirabelle. She wore her simple charcoal grey suit like armor, her face a mask of poise and strength. She was not the victim of this story. She was its hero. Richard stepped back from the podium, ceding the stage. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. He gave her a small, respectful nod. She returned it. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was acknowledgement. It was a bridge. Mirabelle stepped up to the microphone. The room was utterly silent, leaning in to hear the voice that had launched 1,000 headlines. She took a deep breath. "Dziękuję, Richard," she said, her Polish thank you clear and proud. She looked out over the sea of faces, her grey eyes steady. "My name is Maya Kowalski. I am the founder of Nightingale." She paused, letting her presence fill the room before delivering her final, definitive statement. "My work speaks for itself. Are there any questions?" Her voice, carrying the very accent Tiffany Hayes had tried to weaponize against her, echoed through the atrium. It was not the sound of a foreigner, or a waitress, or a victim. It was the sound of the future. It was the sound of power. The press conference was a masterstroke. It didn't just end the scandal. It transformed it. Davenport Innovations stock, which had dipped in the morning, skyrocketed, closing the day up 12%. The narrative flipped completely. Mirabelle was no longer the scheming waitress. She was hailed as the Nightingale of Silicon Alley, a tech prodigy and an embodiment of the American dream. Tiffany Hayes, on the other hand, became a pariah. Her brand, built on aspirational luxury, was now tainted with ugly bigotry. She lost sponsors, followers, and her perch in the social stratosphere overnight. Her attempt to ruin Mirabelle had only destroyed herself. In the months that followed, Mirabelle's life changed in every conceivable way. She moved her parents into a comfortable new home with a full-time nurse for her father. Her mother, free from financial worry, began auditing literature courses at Columbia. Her passion for books rekindled. Mirabelle, meanwhile, became the force she was always meant to be. As CEO of Nightingale, she was relentless, brilliant, and fair. She hired a diverse team of the best and brightest, creating a company culture that valued integrity as much as innovation. Her relationship with Richard Davenport evolved into a complex and deeply respectful professional partnership. The apology he had written and the public stand he had taken had laid a new foundation. They worked closely their weekly strategy meetings, a masterclass in intellectual synergy. The hint of a deeper connection lingered beneath the surface, but both knew that the trust between them had to be earned in boardrooms and business deals long before it could ever be explored elsewhere. The real story was not a romance. It was one of mutual, hard-won respect. Mirabelle's triumph wasn't getting the billionaire. It was becoming his peer. Her value was never in question. It just took a while for the world and for Richard Davenport to see the valuation report. If Mirabelle's story of triumph over prejudice resonated with you, if you believe in the power of dignity and the hidden genius within us, all please show your support by hitting that like button and sharing this video with someone who needs to hear it. Let us know in the comments below if you've ever had a moment where you proved someone's first impression of you wrong. These stories matter, and to make sure you don't miss our next story about the underdog turning the tables, make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell, because we believe that character, not circumstance, is what truly defines us. Thank you for listening.